Hurricane Ada closing in here on Tampa Bay. The unpredictable Cat 1 speeding up from yesterday, now showing signs of falling apart. Our meteorologists are live here with the 10 a.m. update in just moments ago, and to answer your questions here live on Track in the Tropics. Hey there, everybody. JB Buno here with you live once again in your hurricane headquarters, once again with an update here on Hurricane Ada. And yes, it is still a hurricane beginning to reach here the Tampa Bay area. You can look outside your window, folks, and you see it is probably gloomy, dark, and rainy out there. Meteorologist Lee Spann joining us here. You can use the hashtags here on your screen. Hashtag HeyJB, hashtag HeyLee, and hashtag HeyIan. Ian Oliver standing by. I'm going to keep my eyes here, folks, on the WFLA Facebook page comment section. If you have a question about Ada, let us know using those hashtags. We can only throw up the comments with those hashtags. Again, hashtag HeyJB, hashtag HeyIan, and hashtag HeyLee. Standing by with the very latest here, the 10 a.m. advisory in from the National Hurricane Center, meteorologist Ian Oliver. Hey there, Ian.
JB, good morning. Yeah, Ada has been anything but a predictable storm. We've been tracking this the last several days, and we've seen some big updates with this system. It did intensify during the overnight hours. Earlier this morning, it was upgraded to Hurricane Ada as hurricane hunters flew through the storm and found that it had intensified into that Category 1 status. Its motion right now north-northeast at 10 miles per hour. Winds officially still hanging on to 75 miles per hour, so barely at that hurricane criteria. Likely going to be weakening, though, as we move through the next several hours, and we'll show you why coming up in just a moment. But first, this is the satellite and radar presentation. You can see some of the heavier rain bands starting to spread on shore, especially across southern parts of the Tampa Bay area. What we saw during the overnight hours last night was a big burst of convection. This storm got stronger and more organized very quickly, but thankfully, this is absolutely the best thing that could have happened for the Tampa Bay area. This is a 6-hour loop of the water vapor picture, and you saw this morning, 4 a.m., this was developing an eye signature. It was a very well-formed eventual hurricane that had developed over the overnight hours, but you see what happened since then. This system has essentially gotten shredded to an extent, especially on the western and southern side, by wind shear coming out of the west, pushing on the storm, making for a lopsided structure. That allows some of that dry air to enter, and you can see what it's done to all the moisture on the western and southern side of this system. But unfortunately, because of the path of the storm, the most impactful part of it, the eastern and northeastern side, that's the part that's clipping us as we move on through the rest of the day today and then into the overnight hours tonight. Still going to be an impactful and dangerous system, but thankfully one that's weakening on arrival as opposed to strengthening on arrival like we've seen with so many systems in this record-breaking hurricane season. So this is still the official forecast track from the National Hurricane Center. Came out just a few minutes ago at 10 a.m. Later on this evening, offshore the center of circulation, but trying to hang on to at least high-end tropical storm intensity. Because of the trends we've seen on satellite, though, and water vapor over the last several hours, the possibility that this could weaken a little bit quicker, and that's what we'll hope for as we move on through the rest of the day today. But that is the forecast path just offshore of Pinellas County likely, and then making a turn perhaps up into a portion of the Nature Coast for a landfall likely overnight tonight or into the early part of the day tomorrow, now that it is moving northeast at 10 miles per hour. We've got hurricane watches up for coastal areas in the Tampa Bay area with the possibility at least for some hurricane force gusts. I do think that would be right at the immediate coastline, but as these winds start to back off a bit, it's really those rain bands moving on shore that'll have the strongest of the winds in them. Storm surge watch, that is still up, storm surge warning for coastal areas in the Tampa Bay area, 2 to as much as 4 feet of surge, and that's not all the time. What we'll be watching for would be later on this evening, likely around 11 o'clock. I know it's just after 11 o'clock for the St. Pete Pier. That'll be our next high tide cycle, and that'll also be when our winds are starting to shift onshore. Right now we actually have the wind directions with an easterly component, which would push water offshore. But once we see that wind shift as that center of circulation starts passing off to our north, onshore flow develops, and that is where we could see a bit of coastal flooding heading into this evening, first part of the overnight hours tonight. So we'll, of course, be watching that threat very closely for you. And one more threat, a tornado watch that's in effect for Pinellas, Hillsborough, down into Manatee, Sarasota, Hardee, and DeSoto counties. That runs until 5 o'clock, and that is because of that essentially one very strong band that's been pivoting onshore here and will continue to do so over the next hour or two. So that is a threat. Isolated spin-up tornadoes within that band. They will not be long-lived, but that possibility is there. So we'll be watching that for you with Max Defender 8. And lastly, of course, we've got some heavy rain potential. So a flood watch in effect for the entire Tampa Bay area. 2 to 4 inches of rain can be expected, maybe with upside to around 6 inches of rain. The rain's beneficial. This is our driest month of the year. 2020 has been a very dry year. We could use the rain. We just need to try to avoid any flooding. We don't need that rain all at once. So we'll be watching for a flash flood threat as we continue to move on through the day today. Some of those green boxes that are blinking, those are some river flood warnings. Some nuisance river flooding is a possibility. For once, we're starting to see some consensus here with the forecast track of Eta as we move on through the next few days now. You can see the spaghetti plots. If you've been with us over the last several days, they haven't looked like this, that's for sure. They are coming into more of a consensus now, likely with a path just west of the bay and then making a landfall along the nature coast. So we'll be watching for that over the next several hours. Likely overnight tonight, early part of Thursday is when we'll see the actual center of circulation move on shore. The forecast was always for the system to weaken as it moved off to the north. Thankfully, we've seen some of those processes at least beginning to take place this morning with some of that dry air and wind shear acting on the system. Sea surface temperatures are a story too. Farther north we go, you know, we've had several cold fronts now, and that's really helped to back off on these Gulf water temperatures, enough to sustain the system, but not warm enough like we were on the western tip of Cuba or in the western Caribbean when this thing really intensified very quickly. Warm enough to sustain, but not further intensify this system. So I think likely the peak of Eta is what we're seeing right now, or even perhaps behind us a few hours ago was likely when we saw this storm at its worst. Rainfall with the GFS forecast model showing you similar trends that we showed you with the spaghetti plots. That center of circulation passing just off to the north of Tampa and St. Pete up into the nature coast, pulling some of that deep tropical moisture with it. A lot of rainfall expected. Good news with this forecast trend, though, not only has it been a little bit farther east, which we talked about yesterday, a stronger storm could stay farther east, but it's also picked up the pace. So I think by the time we get into the second half of the day tomorrow, it's still windy, but it's nowhere near as soggy. In fact, the rainfall are probably wrapping up. So JB, Lee, this was the band that I'm talking about right here. Some very gusty winds within this band. That's starting to move on shore now. Portions of Manatee, Sarasota County, down into Charlotte and Lee counties off to our south. This is likely where we're seeing the strongest of the wind gusts with this system, but you can't see the whole backside of the storm really starting to dry out, and that has everything to do with some of that dry air that's been able to invade the center of circulation, really eroding what was earlier today, an eye feature forming. That is completely gone at this point, completely eroded by that dry air. Those are some really good signals for the Tampa Bay area as far as the evolution of Eta over the next few hours. Back to you.
Finally, some consensus here with this storm, but of course, all those spaghetti plots heading right for the Tampa Bay area. Meteorologist Ian Oliver, meteorologist Lee Spann, JB Buno here with you live in your hurricane headquarters. What we want to do now is begin to open the Q&A portion here, the meteorologist Q&A. You know how this works if you've been here with us before. Use the hashtags here on the right side of your screen or in the pinned comment here on Facebook Live. Hashtag Hey Lee. Hashtag Hey Ian, hashtag Hey JB. I've been keeping my eye here on the Facebook Live comment section to bring in some of your comments so that we can answer your questions here over the next 10 minutes here on Tracking the Tropics. So the first one I'm going to throw over to meteorologist Lee Spann here. It's from Ashley Lentz, hashtag Hey JB. Do you think it can become a Cat 2?
Well, the good news is that we really don't see that as a possibility. Obviously, Ian pinpointed a couple of reasons why. One of the intrusion of dry air, which is great because the air itself is drying out. There's not as much moisture with it, which also helps to weaken the storm. The other thing is, as it gets closer to land, Ian also showed you this, the water temperatures are much cooler. Thankfully, we've had a couple of cold fronts come through, and water temperatures right along the shelf, just off our coast, are down into the 70s now. Again, it's warm, don't get me wrong, but we really need much warmer than that if the storm was going to intensify. And we have some wind shear as well. So that is changing wind direction or speed with height, and it basically shears a storm apart. So all of those things will work against Eta strengthening. And if anything, it's going to allow it to weaken at some point. Now, obviously, as of the 10 a.m. update, it is still a Category 1 hurricane, but even the forecast from the Hurricane Center says it's actually going to decrease to at least at most a high-end tropical storm.
Next question we have coming in here, it is Ian, we've been talking about the ETA joke here with Eta, and here we have another one here from Deborah Faust, hashtag HeyJB. What is the ETA for Eta in Citrus Park? Not too far away from where I live here in Hillsborough County.
Yeah, JB, Deborah, thanks for the question. It's a little bit complicated in the sense of where the center of circulation is and when you're actually feeling the impacts. ETA is now essentially already, because you have the lopsided structure of the system. It's the northern, the northeastern, and the eastern side of the system that actually still has the deep tropical moisture, some of those stronger rain bands, and those will be rolling in as we move on through the next couple of hours into the afternoon and the evening. When the actual center makes landfall, by definition at least, that's when we'll see a landfalling system. But I think by the time that happens, the worst of this is actually likely well off to our north and east, again because of the shape and structure of this system. The center of circulation about right there, but you see that's not where the worst of the weather is with the system. It's in these rain bands. So these are moving on shore heading into the afternoon, the evening hours. I think we got a really rainy, we got a really windy afternoon and evening ahead. We'll watch for that threat of isolated spin-up tornadoes. So really over the next several hours, just know that weather conditions going downhill fairly quickly. Good news is, because of what's happened with the system over the last few hours, how the whole backside of the system has essentially been degraded so much, it's going to minimize the impacts, at least in terms of duration. We don't have two sides of the storm to go through. We'll just be dealing with these big-time squally wind gusts going through along those rain bands, the isolated tornado threat, and of course the surge threat. But that'll be that, and because the system moves off to our north fairly quickly, and it minimizes those impacts from a duration standpoint. So still, as I mentioned, we got some threats here over the next several hours. It's going to be a very impactful storm, but the good news with this would be this is an absolute disaster. This same storm threat, the same storm path in August or September when we had sea surface temperatures at 90 degrees, this is a worst case scenario for Tampa Bay if this was 2-3 months ago into the heart of the season. Thankfully, it's 11/11 now, a little November miracle for us over the last few hours. Still many threats into the afternoon. Just know that thankfully it's not what we would be looking at if this was the middle of the season, JB.
Yeah, and here we are, of course, talking about on Track in the Tropics, a storm here hitting Central Florida, and yet we've been talking about so much about Mobile, Pensacola, Biloxi, coastal Louisiana, New Orleans, so much here in the hurricane season that is 2020. Here we are now talking about a November storm reaching us here in Tampa Bay. Speaking of Central Florida, Gabrielle Marie Turner, hashtag HJB, is Eta going to affect Central Florida a lot? And when is it expected to come through us directly? So for those of the folks here, Lee, in Central Florida, when can they expect some of the impacts? I'm sure that they're already starting to see some of those fringe impacts already.
Fringe impacts, that was a good way to put this, because even as this makes landfall, quote unquote a landfall in the Nature Coast area, somewhere between basically the Big Bend of Florida and Tampa Bay, it's going to head to the north and east. So if you're talking about Central Florida being places like Orlando or Kissimmee, you're going to feel gusty winds. And if you get a rain band to wrap in through your area, then the winds could actually get relatively strong, 30, 40 miles per hour. Basically, if you're not getting a rain band coming through, your wind speeds are going to be 15 to 25 miles per hour far inland, right in the center of the state. Even as it makes landfall, we're going to see a strong wind, a breezy wind out of the west, but we don't have any more rain bands coming in after it makes landfall. So in the short term, expect it to stay cloudy, expect it to stay breezy, and then you want to watch for any of these rain bands that start to whip through there, because you would be on the outer edge of those, and that's actually where there could be some amount of twisting in the atmosphere, the threat of tornadoes in these rain bands as well, and that's why there is a tornado watch for southern portion where we're getting that onshore wind and those rain bands are a little stronger. But again, it's just kind of a crummy day for places right down the center of the state, because it's going to stay windy and cloudy and rainy, but only if you get one of these rain bands to whip through your particular community would you have any sort of major impact.
Well, this next question, we might have to step away. I don't know if we have this ready to go here on our computers, Ian and Lee, but this next one coming in from Kathleen Carter, hashtag Hey Ian. Is there another storm out there trying to develop, and of course on track in the tropics. We're monitoring the entirety of the tropics, not just one particular system. So what do we say here, Ian, for Kathleen wanting to know if there's other systems out there that we're keeping our eyes on?
Yeah, Kathleen, unfortunately, it looks to be another setup. JB, I don't have those graphics pulled up just because of the proximity of Eta. We were focusing primarily on Eta for this stream, but we talked about Theta, which developed at south of the Azores, weakening as it heads towards Europe. That's out there, and we have that other tropical wave that's moving into the central Caribbean, which was where this wild storm system, you've seen that essentially S question mark shaped curve. It's been a wild track of this system, developed in the central portion of the Caribbean, made landfall in Nicaragua, moved through Honduras, reemerged into the northwestern Caribbean, turned, hit Cuba, took a hard left, made it to the western part of Cuba, and then started wobbling towards us. That's been the evolution and the journey of Eta. We get another tropical wave that's moving essentially into the same position. And the issue with that, Lee was talking about our sea surface temperatures, shelf waters. They've gotten cooler over the last several weeks because of the cold fronts and the cooler air that we've had into the Tampa Bay area, at least a little bit of that. We've had our fair share of record high temperatures too. That's helping us out. But in the Caribbean, those sea surface temperatures are still in the low and mid 80s in spots, so that's what can sustain a much stronger hurricane than what we're looking at on satellite and radar with Eta off our shore. So there is the possibility, and actually a pretty good likelihood, that we'll get another named storm, likely by the weekend. That'll be called Iota. Early forecast tracks with that system take it toward Nicaragua once again, unfortunately, an area that just got battered by Eta when this was a much more powerful hurricane, a Category 4 when it made landfall in Nicaragua at that point. So unfortunately, that looks to be the long-term setup with that. Long range, does that dissipate over Central America? Does it have a path farther off to the north? Still some big question marks long-term with that, but that's what we'll be watching once we get past this one, JB.
Yeah, Ian, we're of course going to continue to monitor the tropics all the way through the end of hurricane season, which, for folks just joining us, that is the end of the month of November. This might be this
allegedly,
next featured
JB. Allegedly.
Right. On the calendar, at least. This featured comment might be the longest hashtag I have ever seen from Carissa Hickel here. Hashtag Hey JB, are we going to experience any power outages in the Tampa Bay area? And I'll throw you guys both up here, and maybe you guys can talk about the likelihood here of power outages, because I would imagine there are going to be some here across the Tampa Bay area.
And we actually, Ian and I discussed this just a little while ago. I mean, you know, these are going to be sustained winds, 20, 30 miles per hour. And then, of course, you'll get those stronger gusts. But that could bring a branch down on a power line, an isolated spot. So could there be some spotty power outages? Yes. This will not be a widespread power outage, which is great news because, boy, those linemen work hard and they work fast. And so when it's spotty like this, they can get out there and get that turned back on very quickly. If it's TECO, if it's Florida Power and Light, if it's Duke Energy, they get out there so quickly. So there will be some, I would imagine, but they will be sporadic.
Yeah, it's not unfair to liken some of these stronger rain bands that are moving on shore from Eta with kind of a line of strong thunderstorms like you might see in the summertime with a sea breeze collision, that unfortunately we get those gusts in those bands. In a regular summertime afternoon up over 60 miles per hour, that can knock down a tree, that can land on a power line and lead to some outages. So that is definitely a possibility heading into the second half of the day today. And also, again, if you live in a place, it's part of life living here that you know is just a flood-prone area, immediate coastline that has trouble when we have higher than normal tides, or if you have a place that's prone to flash flooding. These are the folks that need to be very mindful of this through the second half of the day today, as there is going to be, at least for a period, a component of onshore flow and a bit of a storm surge with this. Couple of feet, you know how it goes. We live right on the water in our part of the country. A couple of feet can cause a lot of problems for some folks. So it's those that need to be particularly concerned about this through the rest of the day today.
The last few questions that we're getting to, again, using the hashtags on your screen, hashtag Hey Lee, hashtag Hey JB, hashtag Hey Ian. We're going to be getting to just a few more here on Track of the Tropics. We're going to be doing live Q&As throughout the day here on WFLA Now, here live in your hurricane headquarters. A little bit of, I guess, some hurricane tropical storm trivia here.
Okay.
John Ray Rice, hashtag Hey Lee. When was the last time the Bay Area was directly hit by a hurricane?
Well, that was 3 years ago, a little over 3 years ago now. Hurricane Irma came through, started in our southern spots around Highlands County, and then kind of went straight up through the Tampa Bay area, bringing Category 1 or 2 hurricane winds. Since then, we've had some brushes with some tropical storms close by, but nothing really that directly hit the Tampa Bay area. We've continued to knock on his whatever wood we could find that we get these on occasion, but when you see what happened to the northern Gulf Coast, where they couldn't get a break every time a hurricane or just a tropical system formed, it was heading in that one direction. We've been spared for quite some time.
Next question we have here coming in, folks. The final few ones we're getting to here. We're going to throw this one over to Ian. Hashtag HeyJB from Sammy Jones. Will Polk County get hit?
Yeah, JB, with some rainfall. Thank you for the question, Sammy. With some rainfall, with some gusty winds, but I think this is really going to be more of a coastal event, at least for the greatest of the impacts. This band moving on shore right now is likely producing some pretty good wind gusts at this point. That's where we're going to be seeing those tropical storm force gusts, perhaps high-end tropical storm force gusts within that band. As it moves inland, in the band, that's where you'll see the possibility of those much higher wind gusts. But as far as the sustained winds, I do think you're far enough removed from this center of circulation, which is essentially moving just to the right of due north at this point, north-northeast at 10 miles per hour. So it's a path that takes it right about here. So in Polk County, you're a little bit removed from the inner core of the system where we're going to see the strongest of the winds. Yes, of course, some of those stronger rain bands can bring some stronger wind gusts along with it. But for Polk County, like Lee was saying, maybe 15 to 25 mile per hour sustained winds, and then gusts up into that tropical storm force range throughout the rest of the day today as some of those bands move through and mix down some of those higher winds that are higher up in the atmosphere.
I'm going to throw you guys both up here for these next two comments. We're going to kind of do a 2-for-1 here, starting with Ira Levy. Hashtag, hey Lee, I have someone flying into Tampa. When would be the best day? Today, tomorrow, or Friday? I'm getting into travel here because this is a really popular time of year. November, December, people are, of course, coming home for the holidays or getting ready to come home for the holidays, or maybe they're just trying to escape some of the colder temperatures we have in some of our more northern states. Maria Sanchez Melendez here, hashtag HeyJB. Will flights be delayed tomorrow? My son was supposed to come home to us. So I'm going to throw both of you guys up here on screen. What is the advice that we give here to folks, our audience members here asking about travel?
Well, today and the next, 4, 6, 8 hours, there may be some travel plans flights that get delayed or postponed or things like that. But after this afternoon and evening, I think you're pretty good from there on out.
Yeah, my parents are flying in tomorrow evening, Lee, and I was actually worried. Of course, you've been tracking with us the changes not only in the track of the system, but also the timing of the system. And originally, a couple days ago, I said to them, hey, you guys might be flying into a tropical storm on Thursday. That no longer looks to be the case, as this thing really has picked up the pace. 10 miles per hour is a pretty good clip at this point. So I think by the time, and you also see what the backside of the storm looks like at this point, breezy conditions on the backside of the storm, but there isn't that much rain, so that won't be that disruptive. Once this passes off to our north tonight, I think by lunchtime tomorrow, Lee, we're talking about dry conditions?
Yeah, easily. And so if you're flying in, it might be a little bumpy. You're coming in tomorrow morning because you're going to be coming through, tropical storm force winds or wind gusts. But I don't think there'll be a lot of concerns for travel after this evening.
And I want to get to, I'm being told here by our digital content staff and our digital content producer, Heather Monahan, here, that we're getting a lot of folks here in the comment section asking about RVs across the Tampa Bay area. Folks like Nicole DeBoard here, hashtag HeyJB, hashtag Hey Ian. I know a lot of people in RVs. We don't always have the best TV service. Should we seek shelter in Tampa? So for folks specifically in RVs, Lee and Ian, what do we say to folks across the Tampa Bay area here with Ada getting closer and closer?
I think a lot of that would depend on where your RV is. I mean, I know people take them right. There are some places you can take it right onto the beach. I think you can do that in the Fort Myers area. They have some. So if you were right on the beach, I might suggest heading inland. If you're unless you're in one of these rain bands, it's not going to be unmanageable. It might get a little rocky if you get right in one of these rain bands that, that has 40, 50 mile per hour wind gust. But again, it's not going to be sustained at that for very long. Unless, Ian, do you have more information about RVs? I don't know a lot about them, but I know you shouldn't be near the water right now.
Yeah, if you got one parked at Fort DeSoto right now, that's not the best scenario. I think right along, like you said, the immediate coastline, that's where we're going to see the strongest wind gusts. Anywhere that you could have your RV parked that's just has anything to help block the ambient winds would be a much better choice. But yeah, the immediate coastline, not a good idea today.
Ian Oliver, Lee Spann, and JB Buno here with you live in your hurricane headquarters. Folks, we're not going anywhere. We're going to be staying with you here live on Facebook. We're going to throw up the very latest model information that we have here from you from the National Hurricane Center. We are, of course, going to continue to track all the developments over the course of this Wednesday, 11/11, as Ian, of course, pointing out here for us.
And at 11 a.m., we'll be on News Channel 8 on TV as well, talking about it.
11/11 at 11.
11.
Well, we'll be continuing to keeping a very close eye here on the ETA of Ada while we're making, of course, all the puns here. Ian, Lee, when are the next updates coming in for the National Hurricane Center? Those updates now are pretty much must-see for folks here in the Tampa Bay area, even though the storm is really knocking on our front door and pretty much almost has a foot in past our front door. What do we say to folks as far as the next updates coming in?
1 o'clock and 4 o'clock. That's when we'll have an intermediate update from the National Hurricane Center at 1 o'clock and a new track update at 4 o'clock. But we'll be keeping you updated. We'll have this, as you mentioned, streaming throughout the day today. You can see what it looks like. Hopefully, which we talked about those trends, what we've seen with the dry air that's taken place this morning. This is going to be very difficult for this system to recover, at least in an appreciable way. So I think we've seen the peak of Ada in the rearview mirror at this point, which is good news. That's not to say that this isn't going to be very impactful for us over the next several hours, rest of the day today and into the overnight hours tonight. But thankfully, it would be very surprising at this point to see this system at least intensify anymore through the rest of the day.
And likely to become a tropical storm, Lee, here in the hours ahead as it continues to sort of weaken in some of those areas that that Ian was talking about here. But one of the things we haven't talked about that I would like to end out on here before we wrap up this particular live update here on Tracking the Tropics, we haven't really talked about a landfall event for what will likely be Tropical Storm Ada. Where, Lee, are we expecting landfall, and what should folks know about it as far as that particular event when it does happen, whether it's later today or tomorrow?
So you can see where Ian is showing you the track there. So it will be north of Tampa Bay and south of the Big Bend of Florida. So but you have to look at that entire cone there. So it could be as far north as Levy County, maybe even heading up into Dixie County, or it could be as far south as maybe Pasco County. But what we've also mentioned is that when you have that landfall, the worst of the weather will actually have already come through. The rain and the strongest winds will be on the north and eastern side of it. So yes, there will be a landfall probably around sunrise tomorrow at some point, but it's going to be a little anticlimactic because today is going to be the worst weather, and then things are going to make landfall, and it's actually going to be a pretty nice afternoon tomorrow.
Yeah, and Ian, really quickly again, I keep saying this is the last thing we're going to talk about, but just the weekend here in Tampa Bay this is going to be cleared out for us for the weekend, right?
Yes, yeah, and eventually we get another cold front through here. That's what we want to talk about, cold fronts in November, not tropical systems, especially 3 of them, like it's September or something. There is a cold front next week, and it actually looks to have real-life, cooler and drier, more comfortable air behind it. So that's a sight for sore eyes. Of course, the short-term forecast is not a good one. The long-term forecast, JB, is a good one.
1 o'clock, 4 o'clock, our next updates live here on Tracking the Tropics with, of course, our Max Defender 8 team here in Tampa Bay. This is our area. We know this area extremely well. We're going to be, of course, tracking Ada every step of the way here as it treks off of Florida's Gulf Coast there, right next to Ian on the center of your screen. That wraps it up for this particular live stream, everybody, on Tracking the Tropics. For meteorologists Lee Spann and Ian Oliver, I'm JB Buno. We'll see you coming up here in a few hours for the next update here live on Tracking the Tropics. For those of you joining us here on Facebook, we'll continue to keep these models up, continue to keep them looping so that everyone here on social media can keep their eye on the very latest here with still Hurricane Ada, low end Cat 1 here off of Florida's Gulf Coast. See you soon, everybody, this afternoon for the next edition of Tracking the Tropics.